Hey everyone, welcome to the Palikari Business Podcast. My name is Abby.
And I'm Nick.
And we're the founders of Odyssey Productions Co., a video production company located in the Central Valley of California.
Yeah, the word Palikari is a Greek word that means a young person who's achieved great things beyond their years.
So in each episode of this podcast, we will be interviewing successful business owners, influencers, and entrepreneurs to learn from their wisdom, experiences, and even their mistakes in hopes of helping you achieve great things beyond your years.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the episode.
In this episode, we interview Thom Guerrero, the owner of The Mortgage Doctor and of the Twisted Pig Bar and Grill restaurant located in Modesto, California. We asked Thom about his experiences starting two very different businesses and what he learned in the process.
Yeah, this episode has got some really good tips in it, and it's going to show you how to define your why, how to approach the recession as a business owner, and how to turn your mistakes into investments.
This episode is absolutely packed with tips. It is so good. You're going to love it, and we hope you learned just as much as we did. So to start us off, can you share about yourself and your entrepreneurial journey and maybe just how you realized you wanted to even be a business owner?
So a little bit about myself. I don't know. I like long walks on the beach. No, I was raised in a family business. So business was just kind of instilled almost more than school. It was just like, this is what you have to do. So in a lot of ways, I really liked it because at the time, like I was close to my dad. And then from a very young age, though, my parents passed away. So I lost both my parents when I was 18. So at that point, I've sort of like got away from it. And I went and I started my own kind of like little path. And I went to like the 9-to-5 scenario. But it just didn't feel right. There was just something that was like fundamentally felt wrong with me, or like consistently getting frustrated with just the construct that I had to play with. And so eventually that's what led me into the path of becoming more on the entrepreneurial side, which even in itself I think is a journey, because I struggle with that term because I feel like barely now I'm becoming more of an entrepreneur. I think before, because the term's like bastardized, I feel like I was more of, I like the term like entrepreneur. So like somebody that's actually doing the work instead of like working on the business. So in this phase of my life, I'm now working on the business, but for years I was just working in the business. So people have different terms for that: freelance, entrepreneur, but that's essentially, I think, that middle ground is a weird place to be in, I feel like, for like a lot of people, and most people think that's it, but that's not it. That's like, you have to get out of that.
Starting.
So now I'm here, so I do have the mortgage business, the Mortgage Doctor. Home of some of the lowest rates in the heartland. And also I have the Twisted Pig, and then I have a couple other ventures as well. But it's just, I've gotten to the phase of my life where I really want to work on businesses. It's been a long time coming to like get to this point. But it's just, for me, my life, I'm like very extreme. So like once I cross a threshold, I can't go back. So I'm just like, this is it.
This is it.
And I got to go forward with it. So that's kind of, that's where I'm at
awesome.
right now.
Yeah, that's cool. So how did you get out of that part where you said instead of being an entrepreneur, you were an entrepreneur? How did you manage to actually break free of that constantly working for?
I think, so it was actually interesting. So I attribute to social media. So when I started to get into social media, and one of the reasons why I'm a fan of it now, and I rejected it for years, but I really got into the idea of like, oh, this is marketing. Okay, so like I can't do social media to like brag about myself, but I can use it to market. Like that makes sense. So in that, I actually created really solid friendships from like people that were all over the place. And so one of my it's funny because now we've done business together. I've helped him buy properties. I was actually just invited to their wedding and I missed it. I'm sorry, Sanjeet. Anyway, but one of my clients from Canada, I was talking to him and he was just telling me, he was like, hey, I really think you need to read this book. So he sent this book over to me. I don't know. She sat on my shelf for a little while. And eventually I was like, you know what, I'm going to read it. It's called Rocket Fuel. And it's literally one of the best business books I've ever read, and I grew up on business books and like listening to Think and Grow Rich tapes, and literally like we had like 5 tapes, and I remember us on family vacations like popping those tapes in, but reading that really is what created that idea in my head. I was like, okay, like this has to change. I'm not doing this to its full potential, and from my perspective, one of the things that I did learn in the book essentially categorizes people into two polars, which is an integrator and a visionary. And so like, I think, for example, like on that scale, I want to say like the visionary started at like 85 points on the test that you take in the book, right? I was like 120. So I'm like hard on that extreme, and which is really funny because it actually helped me see a lot about myself and how I look at things. But so from that perspective, it was really about looking above what I'm in. And that's probably the number one thing in business that I constantly remind people of, which is just like, you need to pop your head up and you need to look at your surroundings. Like, don't just focus on this. Like, what else what else is there that is on the table? And so I think that was the really big push. And I'm extremely committed right now. Like I keep joking, it's not a joke though. Like I'm really committed to being in this place of like semi-retirement in the next 5 years. And it's not coming from a place of like, I have a dollar amount in mind or anything. It's just like, I want the ability to do things in my life that I feel would be like impactful. And so I just want the ability to do that, And then once you start down that road, it gets addicting, because now instead of me, and this might sound like a cocky statement, but once you've done a certain amount of, or you've had a certain amount of success in business, at least for me, it's just bigger numbers. Like it's the same thing. It's just a bigger number, and the number started to be less exciting. What's cool now is actually seeing the amount of people that I do affect by helping them grow like their businesses and working on that. So it's that next level of like, this is great because I'm getting to like transfer knowledge now instead of just trying to like continue to beat myself. I guess,
That's
fill in
awesome.
the bucket till it overflows on everyone else around you.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's a big part of like my ironically, but most of my leadership training was in a church environment. So going through that, like I'm a big believer in like the servant leadership movement and making sure that as a leader, I'm taking care of the people that are under me. Like that's my response. Just like they have a responsibility to look to me for guidance, I have a responsibility to them to make sure that I'm providing what they need. So it's actually it's more of a win-win model versus like, you do this and XYZ. So those were a lot. Like I said, I mean, and it's really funny. Like I really am a big believer in the whole, it takes 20 years to be an overnight success kind of a thing. And if one thing that I think is like really difficult to watch now that the gray hair's in and I've been here for some time is seeing the people that are either getting into industries or just getting going and building their business, and the fact that they feel the pressure that they have to be at this place that like in reality, like there's no reason for them to, like it's totally fine to be in a place where you're building and all of that stuff. So just the vanity metrics that are in the business world, it's really difficult. I feel like there's more pressure now to have vanity metrics as a part of your business model than before. And that's one of those things where like I see the people that are just getting going and I'm like, man, you have so much time on your hands. Like you don't have to worry about getting to that finish line yet. Like, enjoy the journey, like grow organically instead of just, having this crazy out of control growth that you can't handle yet. So, sorry. I don't know.
No,
that's really good.
Tangent.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people, they just think that to be successful, you're not supposed to ever be a beginner, which we've talked about on this podcast before, but like you start out as a beginner, and even when you have a lot of experience and you try something new, you're a beginner all over again, and people just feel like that's wrong to be in that stage. And
well, and I think that's one of the things, like you said, like it's the beginner part is valid, but I think it's also like it goes a step beyond that, which is just to have a failure, Like, and that's the thing, like people, I feel like people are either terrified of failing and or they are more terrified of the image of them failing.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. And so that's huge. And to be honest with you, like some of my biggest business lessons have been found in failure, you know, and that part and honestly, and it goes back to some of that too, because then there's the pressure of like not misstepping. Then then they also have the pressure of like not trying things. So they stay very, you know, safe. And so a lot of times, like I joke all the time with people, but I'm like, hey, like you're not going to know till you do. Like that's kind of how it goes, you know. Social media is like another example. Like it was really funny. And it's really cool. Shout out working with these guys on your social media needs. But it was really crazy getting to a point now where like my social media is so refined. But it's taken me years. And like, it's funny because the reactions that I get from people, they're like, man, you've really like, your social media is this, that, right? Like they see that. But 3 years ago when I was trying to do IG lives and coming up with real estate memes and like all this stuff. And it was like a bittersweet thing when I went through, because I knew in my head, I was just talking to one of my friends and real estate agents that I work with about the mortgage doctor social media, but they were saying, they're like, well, she was saying from the perspective of just looking at it now, she's like, I feel like your identity is lost. And I was like, no, I'm just changing the identity on you and you haven't caught up yet. I'm like, but you will, and you're going to realize like, that's what it is now. But on the same token, you know, it's so funny because like as I was going through and shifting it over to a business and like removing myself from it, I was deleting years of content off of the page, which is where like if you go on there now, there's like 12 posts, I think, which are like all the more refined stuff. But I'm just deleting years of like what I felt like was my life and my work. And some things I was proud of. Some I was like, wow, that was edgier than I thought I ever was. Like, I'm surprised I didn't get a letter about that. But going back to it, like those were all that was the trial and error of it. And so now people can look at it and say like, there's a certain sense of like, I must use the word mastery of it, but it's just like a better handling of it, or people now aspire to be at that level. But on the same token, like I was crawling before and bumping my knees and like, you know, trying to figure this out over and over again. And when I was going through and deleting stuff, like I literally was watching the campaigns of like where I was the funny guy, where I was the educational guy, where I was this. So I saw the phases of it. And it was just it took like 3 hours. It was like 3 hours out of my night to go through and do that. But it was just so funny to see like, from the beginning to like not the end, but like to this new chapter, and it's really parallel to like anyone's journey and like anything, you know. And so that's same thing you've heard me tell my crew when we're like trying to do videos, and they're just like, you're so good. And I'm like, because you didn't see all the times where I was bad. That doesn't mean I'm not inherently good at this. I just was bad at it so much that now I know. I know I have a better handle on it, you know? And so, you know, to the point of like, you know, just circling back to that, that's what's sad about a lot of industries and business today and entrepreneurship and all that stuff, is that people feel like they have to have it 100% dialed instead of just going out there and kind of getting going. And so, it's a thing.
Sort of on that note, what are some of the, if you're comfortable sharing, you mentioned like some of your biggest lessons were from failures you've had. What were some of the things you learned that maybe people didn't see, something like a failure that happened or something that was really difficult, but you learned a lot from it? Yeah.
I have a couple NDA ones that I probably can't mention, but I will say, even this year, I've had some massive failures. And if I had to like quantify it, I could say like there was this one mistake that I had this year that collectively, and I'm not joking, but it was probably like $100,000 mistake. So that's a pretty decent, that's a pretty decent, can I say shit in here? That's like an oh shit moment, right? You're like, hey, this is something that and on the same token, so like that would be an example of it to answer your question. So like that's an example, right? So like I have this like huge dollar amount of, let's call it 100. Let's just chalk it up to like 100,000. Okay, so there would be people that would be like in a ball crying in a corner, thinking like, how, like, what did I do? I ruined my life or whatever, right? But on the same token, if you guys are around me enough, you'll hear me say this at some point. The way that I saw that situation was like, what were the things that I could have done better and I didn't, right? Like, because the last thing that I do in any situation is like the blame game. Like, who did this? Like, no, I did it. Let's just start there. But what are the biggest things? And I tell my business partners all the time, like, hey, like, we already paid for it. We already wrote the check. We might as well learn the lesson. I look at it like going to school. Like I could have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to business school, which I didn't. And I would have wrote that check and I wouldn't have cried about it. I would have felt accomplished, right? It's the same concept, except it's real life. Yeah. So I'm just writing a different kind of check. The issue, though, is not in writing the check. It's in writing the check and not taking home the education that you just paid for, right?
That's really good.
And that's what I think, like, that's where I feel like most people miss it in life and in situations. And it's not a positivity. There's no, like, Pollyannish, like, everything's fine kind of a thing. It's just like, no, this is real. Like, this is exactly what's going on right now. Like, this is all education. And I think for myself, one of the advantages that in a lot of ways is a disadvantage, but one of the advantages that I do have is I don't have a lot of formal education, but I love educating myself, and I was basically like raised to be a student. So like I said, like it wasn't, my dad didn't care about he did care about my report card. Sometimes there's bruises about that, but the times where my dad almost focused more on was just like what, it was like a tape that we were listening to on some sort of business principles or something like that. And those were and I think that was really a neat thing to be raised on and kind of see, because it just put into perspective, like the principles are all transferable. Whatever you're going to learn is going to transfer into something. There was actually, not to get spiritual on you guys here, but we are in a church on this. But there was actually, I was telling somebody recently, we were just having a business meeting, but I was like, hey, I don't know how up to speed you are on the Bible here, but I was like, there's a wonderful story that I think is in the Bible that a lot of people miss. And so she was asking me, and I was like, hey, you've heard of like David and Goliath, right? All that other stuff. And she's like, yeah, I've heard of that. And so like so many people, and this is also like analogous to like life, like so many people focused on that one battle of like David versus Goliath, and the fact that like he defeated Goliath, and you're just like, oh my gosh, that's so great, right? But that wasn't his last battle. And on top of that, one of the things that I think is the most interesting is like there is this passage where he talks about basically like David's running right after he killed Goliath, and the king is now trying to kill him, right? So somebody else is attacking him, and he's on the run, and he goes to this church, and so they feed him, and they're like kind of giving him refuge, right? And there's this one line where it says, and like in the church, basically there was the sword that he slayed Goliath with, right? That was sitting there, right? Yeah. And the one line was, and David picked up the sword and took it, which to me was one of the most powerful things, because what he used what essentially defeated, right? And in that last huge battle, like that one thing, like that wasn't over. Like he got to take that into another battle down the road. And I feel like that's the same thing with life in a lot of ways. Like the thing that you're going through today, business, life, but business particular, because that's what we're talking about, like that lesson, if you learn it, you get to take that into your next battle. Like it's really sitting there stored for you. It's literally right there. You already paid for it. Like it's there. So pick it up and take it to the next thing, And I feel like that also helps you have less of a mindset of defeat, because you're like, oh, I'm going into a new battle. No, you're not. Like you're not facing something new, right? There's parallels here. So that's it's not something, it's a different situation, but similar principles at play. Yeah. And most people in business, they don't look at it like that. They just, and I see people that I constantly have to calm down, like, right? Oh my gosh, what are you, like, I deal with timelines all day long, right? You know what's funny is like, it's hard for me to remember what the day is now because like I'm in the future all the time because like things are supposed to close here. So like, it's all forecasting, right? But I'll get into situations where people are just like losing their mind and I'm like, it's going to be okay. Like this is going to X, Y, Z. And it's not that I don't care. I actually am very passionate, but on the same token, I know that, hey, like, this is going to be fine. This is how you're going to do it. Even today, I was coaching somebody and I was like, look at how I'm attacking this right now. Like, watch what I'm doing. I'm not going to believe that somebody's going to, take care of something and just trust it at face value. I'm going to question it. I'm going to be a skeptic and somebody's going to give me an answer that I'm not going to like, and I'm going to push back on it, And so I literally today was walking somebody through something. I was like, and this is how, when you say Tom's going to handle it, this is why. Because like these are all the things that I'm looking at, but all of those are swords from my other victories that I carry into the next one. Yeah, right.
That's really good.
That is really good.
So sorry, I'm not preaching on this. That's not.
No, you're
right.
That
was a really good analogy.
Yeah, you're right. Because most people just have the mindset of just forget about yesterday and go tomorrow's a new day. Right. But don't forget about yesterday. Take it with you.
Yeah, exactly. Carry that forward.
That's good. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So this is kind of a different set of questions now, but I'm kind of wondering, you have a restaurant and then the mortgage doctor, and those are two pretty different businesses. Are there struggles or things that you had to learn that come with running two very different businesses at the same time?
Well, first and foremost, understanding that I'm not the smartest person in the room is like a great starting point. Because like legitimately that is a huge downfall of for people. So, but we already talked about principles and parallels and stuff like that. But so from that perspective, I think coming at it from like being a student, which is what I usually do in like any situation. Like most people, if I get into a room and I don't know people, like I can turn on like social butterfly if I need to, or I can sit back and watch, and which is usually what I would prefer to do before I start engaging. And as the same thing in those businesses, it's just mortgage, or I organically grew into, but the restaurant, was coming out of, left field. But what is really interesting is, one, understanding where my strengths are, and even better, understanding where my weaknesses are, and letting people come into the weakness part of it. But then on the same token, also still like acknowledging like, hey, I still have like some strengths here, which are like this X, Y, Z, and it's been interesting in the restaurant side of things, because I feel like progressively my skills come more to play, because a lot of them are the more like leadership and business skills that I've worked on for years. But the struggle, there's obviously the learning curve is there. I wouldn't call it a struggle. It's more of a learning curve. The learning curve is definitely there. But I do think the struggle would have been if I had gone into that thinking like I know what I'm doing, because I don't. And I openly tell people like I do not know what I'm talking about, like just for the record. So feel free to like counter me on this. But I am going to tell you like what I think is like a business principle, and like this is something that should be done, or should be done this way. And so that's, and the cool thing is with that like is because like it's like an insecurity, like I don't know what I'm doing, like all this other stuff. But as much as there's like that BS there, the cool thing is seeing the things work again, because you're just like, oh, that worked, this is working, so to speak. So I struggled a lot, for the record. It is a huge struggle. Here's one of the things that's cool about the restaurant industry is it is 100% like a team sport. There's no one-man show there, which is interesting because like in the mortgage world, I feel like it very easily can be, because it's just like, you're the guy, you can handle it. Like one person can pretty much handle all the different parts of that. And that's not to say like in a restaurant there can't be like, one person, but like in a restaurant like that size and with that many moving parts and all that, you can't. So I think it's really like the struggle, if I had to give the biggest struggle in getting into that environment, is truly like relying on the team. Which is a struggle, because it's not like, hey, I can just like carry this. In the mortgage industry stuff, I know I can pick up any part of it and like take it. Not so much in that part.
And
So
that's scary to have to trust other people to take care of those things.
Yeah. And we have a lot of really, really great people, for sure too. So like, yeah, it's just an amazing team. And I have a really great partner in that business too, who has a lot of the knowledge base as well. But like I said, I mean, I think that that's something that is like continuously being worked on in that side, which is just like, hey, like having the ability to like really break this down as like a business sometimes, because that's actually what works against it, honestly, sometimes too, is the fact that it's like, well, you do it this way. Well, why do you do it that way? Does that make the most sense, or is just the way it's been done?
Yeah.
You know? So
Since we're on the topic of managing the two businesses, how do you manage two businesses plus make time for your family? Because I know your family is a big thing for you. So
it's definitely the team, you know, having the team there and knowing what pieces are mine and like what pieces aren't, so to speak. And it was really interesting. Like one of my friends and colleagues, like he just bought a restaurant too in downtown Modesto. I'm not saying he was trying to copy me, but he kind of was. He had a manager in there, and that manager was essentially trying to do everything, and it like was quickly falling apart, like within a matter of weeks, falling apart.
Wow.
And so for myself, what I aim to do right now is I'm actually trying to give myself more and more and more boundaries. And in having more and more boundaries, it actually helps. But it's twofold. One, I'm developing people, which is great. So I'm actually saying like I know I can do that, and I know that out of my own hubris, I know that I could probably do that better than anyone that I know that can do that, right?
Yeah.
But then on the same token, like if I always do it, then this won't grow. Like this won't grow past me, you know? And so right now, like that's a big part of it, which is just like, and one of the things that I say like a million times a day right now, which is good fences make good neighbors. So there are having definitions and having understandings, verbal understandings, and you know, writing understandings are even better of who's responsible for what, like is critical when you start to get that many moving pieces, because it can become very, very messy. And going back to one of the, questions that you'd asked earlier, or no, it wasn't lessons. It was, you were asking about mistakes, failures. Yeah, failures. Yeah, so I could contribute most of my more recent failures to not learning that lesson soon enough. But now I paid for it enough where I'm like, I'm gonna learn it at this point. And so I'm a real big believer in that now, and I think that really helps. And that's where I've noticed like people in like partnerships or businesses or whatever you have more than just like a one-man show, if that's not clearly defined at some point it will like fall apart. And so for me right now, like that's really big. I also now I'm at the point where I'm pretty close to like living and dying by my calendar. That's taken years to get to that point, because I am not a planner. Like I am not at all a planner. I would just and it's so funny too, because like the last thing I will say on that note, which is thanks to years of therapy, but it's just like, so actually combining the two different parts of my life, which is like business and personal. And that might sound weird because, but I think the concept is like, or at least what I have seen with my own life. So I don't know if this is true for a lot of people, but at least for me, like I had two different, two different almost like personas of like, this is like, and like people legitimately joke about it. They'd be like, oh yeah, that's like lender Tom. And then that's like personal. It's like my personal life could be like a dumpster fire, right? Of all this stuff and like whatever. And then, but then my business was like a different story. I was like, no, this has to be this way, whatever, right? To get to this level, I've actually had to like merge the two. So like my personal life can't be as like messy and chaotic. It has to be more formulated. And so that actually helps the cohesiveness of it.
That's really interesting.
That's just how I did it, like honestly, and it's really weird. But yeah, no, I wasn't joking about the years of therapy. Like literally my therapist did tell me one time in one of our sessions, she was just like, I forget how she phrased it, but it was something to the extent of, when your business life and your personal life merges, she's like, you're going to reach a level of success you've never thought of because you're just running two different operations. And she's like, the amount of stress that happens from that on both sides, like weighs on you essentially. So, so that's been a lot of like my more recent workings to do that. But, and I'm not going to say that I'm just like a genius, but a lot of it too also had to come out of like necessity.
Yeah.
So there's a huge necessity. Like right now, I live half my life in SoCal. So for 12 days a week, I'm in Southern California. Like every month. Sorry. 12 days a month. Yeah. Okay. I'm in Southern California. That's the coffee talking. And during those 12 days, like I'm shut out. Like I can't, I can virtual into meetings and stuff like that, but I can't say like, oh, I'm going to go do that or like I'll go take care of that or whatever like that. So like those skills have to build. And ironically, like this is not a position I wanted to be in, and I don't think I'll be in it for very long, but I'm still in it right now. And it was one of those things, like I was telling somebody, I'm like, it is crazy the fact that like I've had to learn how to do this because of this obstacle or this it's another word people use for that. I can't think of it right now, but this adversity that I'm facing at the moment. But I was just talking to a friend about that, and I was like, yeah, but I'm like, if I hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't have started to grow, and I wouldn't have done XYZ because I would have just been so used to being in the mix that I never would have let go, and that's part of the problem of being, this is part of the, I don't even know what the original question was. Sorry, I'm tangenting.
No, you're fine. This is good.
Yeah. But that's part of the problem of being, quote unquote, like depending on your definition of successful, but I'm going to loosely use that term right now, but being successful or top producing or whatever it is, that is higher than normal. And people don't want to hear this at all, but that actually means that there's something wrong with you. And I'm a firm believer in that. I know, like, it sounds stupid, right? But it is legitimately. And I was just telling one of my business partners this because they were like, they were laughing and they were like, "What do you mean? There's nothing wrong with you?" And I'm like, "There's something wrong with you if you don't think there's something wrong with me." And so I was basically, the way that I see it is from a human nature standpoint, right? Like at our base level, right? Like our job for hundreds of years was like to survive, right? Like ingrained in us is like just survive, right? Survival is not about being crazy and doing a maximum output for no reason, right? That's true. It doesn't exist out there. Like you'll see any example that you see in nature, right? Let's consider the birds for a minute. Any example you see in nature where people do that, like, or where animals do that or whatever, it's just about the surviving part of it. Like if somebody's storing up to hibernate, they're not storing for 10 years. They're like, this is one season that I'm building and then I'm going to be cool. Right. So then it would make sense that if you're achieving some sort of high level of anything, something's wrong. Right. Okay.
That's true.
So I recognize that. I recognize that there's something wrong with me, which I think is vital, because if you don't recognize that part, then you can't really start to lead people. Because on the same token, I would then expect that out of anyone that I'm leading. And that's not good.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
Because then I'm trying to have them be broken like I'm broken. And that's not necessarily, one, it's not a good thing because you shouldn't be. And two, it's just not good for the relationship because somebody doesn't feel like, either way, like that's a bad deal.
Yeah.
And so to actually try to manage expectations and not try to view, and that's honestly why it took me so long to get to a point where I could sort of manage something. It's like I had to let go of like perfectionism. I had to let go of the idea or the ideology of like, this has to be this, or like somebody has to do it like me. Like, no, like 80% is amazing. Like if you did 80%, that's great. That's 80% that I don't have to be there. And I'm okay with that, sort of. So anyways, that's so part of it too. It's weird.
I've never thought of it that way, but that's really good.
It's counterintuitive, but and that's part of the problem with the hustle culture going back to that point we were talking about earlier with like people starting a business, people getting going and all that other stuff, is like they have unrealistic expectations and eventually they let themselves down, which is a sad thing, right?
Yeah.
It's actually psychologically it beats people up because they're just like, why can't I be like so-and-so? Well, so-and-so had a tragic childhood and something probably went wrong and they feel like their value is in production now. So is that a bad thing that you don't feel like that? Like you could aspire to do better, right? But there is a point where it's like, hey, it's okay to be in a normal zone or a healthier zone. That person won't last long. Like, you know, and that's why I tell people all the time, like, do not look at me as a model. Like, don't be like me. Be successful, but be successful in your own right, because there's nothing wrong with that, right? So people shouldn't really aspire for some of that unless they're willing to take that on. Like, unless they look it in the eyes, which is fine too, unless it's consensual, like, yeah, I'm going to be a maniac right now and agree to push myself beyond normal limits that are just, it's not a necessity. I had this guy actually this is like an old story, and I doubt he'll ever see this, but so there was this guy when I was going through loan officer licensing. So when I went to loan officer licensing, it was funny because like I had literally reached the zenith of like a position that I was in banking. I was in this awesome branch. My branch was at the beach. Literally, people would pull up in bikinis to get out in front of my branch to go to the beach. It's just like one of those things where you're like, this is life. Like I don't know what, like I could walk to like, it's just like it was a great setup, right? And then I had been trying to, once I made the decision I wanted to go into the loan officer kind of role and get into like mortgages and stuff, tried and nothing was working. I couldn't get a shot. And then finally I got a shot, but I got the shot when I had the best setup. So the whole time when I had the crappy setup, I never got the opportunity, but I got the opportunity when I had the good one, right? So I ended up making the decision I was like, all right, well, I'm gambling here, so let's go. And when I was in training, it was this class of like, I think it was like 60 people, and you had to do like 3 personality tests, and they selected 60 out of 2,500 applicants to go into this program to get licensed. Right. So this is like very, very, very serious. You got paid minimum wage.
Wow. The
whole time you worked there until you got licensed. And then on top of that, there was a series of cuts as you got through that. Like if you didn't pass your tests to get licensed or any of that stuff, like you could get out of the program potentially. So that was my life. And that's what I left the best job that I had for, right?
Yeah.
That tells you something's wrong with me right there. But I did it. And so it was really interesting though, because I was in a room full of me's. And that was the one time in my life where I could look around, I could be like, oh my gosh, like going back to that, like they literally like got down to the technical psychosis of like what makes these people tick. And like now I was in a room of like 800 of those. But in my class, there was this one individual, and he was a cool guy. He was kind of quiet. But I tried to like help him out, and like I would talk to him and stuff like that. And I thought he was a cool dude, but nothing like, hey, you know, extraordinary or like, oh my God, you know, just, I remember like going to his desk and teaching him things. Right. So fast forward, I end up leaving, and then I go, and then I'm like building a business and all this other stuff. And I changed areas. And so, but then I would hear these stories about this guy, and they were like, did you hear about so-and-so? I'm like, no, I didn't hear about so-and-so. Oh, he's like blah, 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 this and blah, blah. Guy's just like crazy successful, like just kicking everyone's butt in the industry, like in that company, right? He basically became like number one, and then he took what was number one and he like did quadruple of what number one had ever been. Just literally an animal. And but I was in class with him, like, and I would never bet on that guy. I never would have been like, that's the guy. But it was really funny though, because like anytime I would talk and I would get these updates from people, like I would in my head, because I knew the job and I knew what it was, and I knew the hours, and I knew what it was. In my head, I was just like quantifying it, like he is spending an insane amount of time there. Like he's probably taking calls like 23 hours a day, like no joke. It was like that much time he had to do. And sure enough, like that was what he was doing. There was some crazy thing in him. And once again, too, and it was so funny because, he's not the guy that you would pick. So I feel like he had something to prove. But he was just eat, breathing, sleeping, wouldn't let anybody outwork him kind of a
Yeah.
deal. And in a lot of ways, like, it's commendable because you're just like, wow, like, good for you. But then it just exceeded a point. It's so funny because that's one of the few times in my life where I saw somebody exceed a point where people praised it because they were just like, this is insane now. Like, when are you going to stop? Like, you're just going past. Like, he actually made, at that company, he was the first person to make $1 million 1 year working for a company in production. That's impressive for any loan officer, period. But especially in that position, and he hit that mark. But it was so funny because even though that's an impressive mark, people were no longer excited about his success. Like, they saw how much of him was obsessed with this.
Unhealthy.
Yeah. Exactly. So just going back to that like extreme thing we were talking about. So like that was kind of cool, not cool for him, but it's cool for me just to kind of see that and say like, okay, like there is a level where this just doesn't make sense anymore. And so many people I don't feel like are like given that opportunity to see that. And ironically, like most people take so long to like reach a certain amount of success that at that point they're so invested in the identity that they can't let go of it.
Yeah.
It's hard to back off.
Yes. Yeah, because you're like, that's me now.
Yeah, it's like the hustle culture where everybody on Instagram Reels and everything is saying like, you need to work harder than everybody else, you need to get up earlier than everybody, and all that stuff that just kind of makes it to where it's that unhealthy drive. Like if I'm not constantly working and obsessed with being successful, then I'm not going to get there.
Yeah. Well, anything in an extreme is like not healthy, right?
Yeah.
Like it's always the moderation of it. So like any good thing can inherently be bad if there's too much of it. And unfortunately, like I said, like in the society that we're in and the environment that we're in right now, like that is not at all talked about as much as it should be. And that ultimately is why going back to the term we started with, the entrepreneur term is bastardized a lot, is because like people love to think that they are. So the definition of an entrepreneur is the literal definition is you are not doing the work. You are managing people that do the work. So anytime if I go to make coffee, right? I'm not an entrepreneur anymore at a restaurant, right? Yeah, I'm like part of staff, right? So like, and if I'm making coffee all day to these people, then I'm a staff member there and I am managing it, but I'm self-employed. Like that's a better definition of it, right? Or like I said, freelance or whatever you want. And so going back to it, like I think that's one of the things is like it's been polished, it's been glamorized now, entrepreneur, But as a literal definition, if you are doing the work, you are not an entrepreneur. You are just self-employed, and that's one of the things that the hustle culture really, really magnifies and praises is people being in those traps. And it's a long-term trap. Like I saw my dad never get out of that trap. Like my dad never was able to get to the point where he was truly an entrepreneur. He was a business owner. He was self-employed. He started to build a team, but he couldn't get past that threshold of getting to where he was the one running the show, but not working in the show, so to speak. And so I think that's really big for me because for what I'm striving to do right now, because like I do want to reach that level of actually, running the show, not working in the show, so to speak. And it's not for anything other than like, I hope it's not a hubris thing at this point, but I really do think it's just like a quality of life thing. It's like what I want to do. And I feel like it's a healthier version of that work ethic versus constantly being in the mix,
Yeah. I think
Do you have any steps or actionable steps that someone could take to get out of that working in the business? Like how do you even find a team and get people to work under you? How do you get that started?
Well, the first thing is like stop trying to look successful, like honestly. And that sounds like dumb, but it honestly is. Like stop trying to keep up with the image of success and understand like if you are building a team, you are not going to achieve the same amount of success as you working your ass off for your own benefit. Right? Like I could tomorrow go and put my hand at the plow of my business and work my business, not on my business, but in my business, and I could make more money, right? But in that, and so actionable thing is like, first of all, like, what is your definition of success? Like, most people can't give you their definition. Most people tell you what they see, and what they see, they think is successful, but they don't know that that's their definition of success. Like, there's not a Lamborghini in your parking lot right now, right? One, I probably wouldn't fit in one. But second thing is, like, there's just no reason why that makes any sort of sense for me as a business owner, you know, unless I'm trying to allude to this successful ideology or this presence, right? There's some place for that, but at the end of the day, it's not entirely genuine. So first thing is, like, what is your definition of success? And like, for me right now in my life, my definition of success is not more money. If I was just gung-ho on like, I want to make more money, I already know how to make more money. It's not doing that. My definition of success is to have the amount of work-life balance now to where I'm not constantly there, but then it's also the reward part of it, which is like, now I've had to also change going back to my definition of success, and I have to find success in what my team does. So like, my team has to win for me to feel successful, not I have to win to feel successful. And that's like one of my favorite people to listen to right now is Layla Hermosi, right? Alex is cool, but I feel like Layla is like a genius, like honestly. And I think the cool thing about Layla is like, she's my polar. So like, going back to that whole explanation of like visionary integrator, right? So she's an extreme integrator. So she's definitely a polar that I could tell without even her taking a test at this point. And but in hearing, she did make a comment about, which is you hear pretty frequently, like, why is it that good producers don't make good managers? And the reason why good producers don't make good managers is because, going back to it, like, a good producer or a top producer or somebody like that, like, they're using that to like fulfill something inside that's wrong, right? Or that's tweaked, right? So like, that immediate success, or it's the same as watching people do drugs, like, honestly. And that sounds dumb, but it literally is the same thing. And something that is super dry, but if you guys have ever read The Power of Habit, I don't know if you've heard of that book.
Yes, by James. Is it the one by James Clear?
Yellow cover,
something
right?
like that. Yeah.
Boring. It's super boring. It's like it's literally like a high school textbook. But it's really funny because like Atomic Habits basically plays off The Power of Habits. Atomic Habits is like a what is it called when they do the shorter versions of the books or whatever?
Summary,
Cliff Notes. It's
Cliff
Cliff
Notes.
Notes. Yeah, it's essentially Cliff Notes of The Power of Habit. But in The Power of Habit, though, it talks about that reward cycle, right? And that's essentially the same thing, going back to that top producer, the difference between a top producer and a manager thing, right? So when you become a manager and you shift gears into the management role, which I'm honestly still learning, like 100%, but I no longer am getting the hit like I would if I just like, I did this deal, somebody said I was good. I'm posting my review, I'm texting people, like high-fiving an agent, like all those external little things. Those were all my rewards in that cycle. Now I have to remove myself, which is why, so first actionable thing is like definition of success. And then the second thing is like, do not play into your current reward cycle, whatever that is. You know, like, you need to see what you're doing, and you have to shift that reward cycle over. Actually, I could go on a tangent about that real quick because I have a very funny story about rewards. So I'm not a great salesperson. 100% will say that. People look at me and they're like, you're a liar. And I'm also, so the two things that are probably really weird about me is, one, I don't think I'm a great salesperson. The second thing is, I'm way more introverted than people give me credit for. Because a lot of that is just like the business side of it. Like, I've had to learn to be more extroverted, or I would never survive. Like, I just couldn't pay my bills. So those are the two things. But so here's an example of a failure where I almost got fired, which I think is funny, talking about like reward cycles. So I was working at a bank, and this particular bank, this was like one of the funnest banks that I worked for, which sounds like a weird thing even to say in a statement, but it was just like a younger crowd. I really liked my coworkers. It was cool. So like, my assistant manager, I really liked him. He was a really cool guy. And he pulls me to his office one day and he's like, hey, Tom, I got to talk to you real quick. He's like, come in here. So I'm like, hey, what's going on, man? Like, I think we're just going to like talk about something fun or whatever. And he's like, here's the thing, man. He's like, I like you. Everyone likes you. Clients like you. Like, you're very likable, right? And I was like, oh, man, I like you guys too. He's like, yeah. He's like, but you're going to get fired. That's the point.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, what's going on? He's like, I'm being serious. He's like, I've been taking heat for you and taking heat for you. He's like, and I can't take it much longer before this is going to come down from the top. And he's like, why aren't you selling credit cards? And so, because as a banker, like you're in charge of like helping people, but really you're there to sell stuff, right? So like that's really the name of the game. And so I'm not going to name this bank, but it rhymes with Mace. And so I'm at this bank and they're really big at selling the credit cards. And so I was like, I'm going to be honest with you. I hate credit cards. I was like, I absolutely hate them. I was young at that time and I got myself into trouble with credit cards. I ruined my credit score, like from a very young age. It was just all kinds of bad. Right. Yeah. So like literally like credit card, my eye twitched. I was like, I don't like these things. And he's like, here's the deal. He's like, I've actually even been putting some credit card sales in your name just so you didn't look like you had none. He's like, but you got to start getting some, man. And he's like, I can't hold this off much longer. And so I was like, dang it. Like I go back to my desk and I'm like all bummed out. And so like I remember sitting there because I was like, I need my job. I don't have any other money. Like this is like poor kid days. And so I was like, what can I do here? Because like I don't get any reward out of like, and I hadn't even read that book at that time, but I just knew like there wasn't anything redeeming. The way that I saw it was like I needed to believe in what I was doing, and I had no belief that that was a good thing for anyone. Yeah. So like it just didn't work for me. And so I thought about it and I thought about it and I thought about it. And it's ironic because this was literally my answer, and then look at where I'm at. But my answer to that was like, well, I can't sell a credit card because I feel like they're garbage, right? But I can help people buy a house. I think that's important. And if they get a credit card, they could buy a house one day because that builds their credit. That's literally the thought that came to my head. Right? So I was like, cool. I was like, so if the end result is they get to buy a house for their family, but I have to sell them a credit card to get there, I can do that because that's helpful, right? Like I believe in that. So ironically, this is all true too. You could fact check me on it because I'm pretty sure, but so I go to work the next day, I sold 5 credit cards. Literally the next day. And I came up with this whole thing and I was like, like I was just, and then the day after that, I was like, well, maybe that was a fluke or whatever. I sold another 5. And then the day after that, one of my coworkers, one of their clients that was with them overheard what I was talking about. And they came to my desk after they were done with her and they got a credit card from me because they overheard me talking about credit cards and how they're amazing because this, and I was like, once again, I'm not a great salesperson, but I believed in it. And I was like, you need to work on this. Like, you got to get here. So like, I had this whole spiel about how I did this to the point of where they sent me to other branches to teach people how to sell credit cards because they were like, how are you doing that? But that was breaking that reward cycle for me. And it was also like changing the way that I was getting rewarded because I knew I wouldn't feel rewarded in doing that. And I'm using different terminology. Like I didn't believe in that or I didn't have a reward in it, right? But I couldn't do that and that before. But as soon as I understood a way that was redeeming or a way that rewarded me, I was able to do it all day long without a problem. So another actionable thing too. So, and this is another analogy that I use all the time is like, watch what fuel you're putting in your tank, which kind of goes back to that point of like, what are you doing? Are you doing something just to hit a metric? Or are you doing something because you believe in something that's bigger than you, right? Yeah. That is an example. So like, I was just telling a loan officer, like when I started my career, I'm from Southern California. When I moved up here, I knew no one, like nothing, like, no point of reference. And then they're just like, yeah, cool. Get into a business where your network is your net worth. Okay, cool. I know no one, so I'm going to be broke. This is awesome, right? But there's like this one pivotal story that I retell all the time. And that was, one of my managers, when I first, was in the area, somebody approached me. I actually had no plan at all. I literally Google mapped lenders. I had just got licensed. Like I didn't have a lot of experience at all. And I was just calling people. They were like, how did you get our number? I was like, Google Maps. Like, I just wanted to see, are you guys hiring? What's your deal? Da, 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 da. Like, I don't know how this works. So I just made a list, and I called like 30 people because I was in phone sales. So I was just calling people to figure out what's going on. And so long story short, I took a position, wasn't a great fit. Somebody else ended up approaching me. So when I was talking to, like, it was like a mom and dad scenario. So I'm talking to the mom manager, right? And he's like, oh, I think you're great and you're funny and this, and I've seen you out there. And so he's like pumping me up, right? And so I'm like, oh, maybe, like, I don't know. I just, I don't know if I'm ready to make a move, blah, blah, blah. And so, like, that guy couldn't convince me with, like, his niceties that I needed to make this move. I needed to do this, right? I was just like, oh, that's cool. But, and I like you, and you seem like a cool person, but, right? And then he's like, you'll have to meet my business partner, blah, blah, blah. So I finally meet the business partner, right? And I swear, like, this guy, like, just, like, looked me up and down, right? It was just like this up and down motion. And he was just like, okay, so you think you're going to be good? Like, it was just this very frank.
Very direct.
Yeah. And I was like, well, I'm not saying I'll be good. He's like, how much business are you doing? I'm like, well, really not that much. Like, I just moved up here. He's like, and, he just started asking me questions like this and that. And, like, everything was just like an objection, an objection, an objection. And so like one of his final thoughts, which I'll never forget, and he was just like, he's like, if so-and-so is signing off on you and he wants to take you on, like, I'm okay with that. He's like, but we don't know if you're going to be good. We don't know if you can close purchase deals. We don't know what kind of producer you're going to be. We don't know if you can meet real estate agents and connect with them. He's like, we don't know all these things. He's like, I'm not impressed. Like, literally his words. Not impressed, but, if you want to. And I remember, like, the other guy was just like, did you just, like, I'm trying to recruit this guy, and, like, just basically tore him a new one, right? And he wasn't wrong either, but on the same token, I also didn't walk in there like, oh yeah, I'm hot shit, and, like, I'm here to run this place. But so I remember, so this is like a fuel story, because I remember I literally, like, for the next 6 months, I timed it to where I looked at the amount of time that producing loan officers worked. Like, I would watch them come into the office. I would take into account their coffee breaks, their bullshitting time, all of that stuff, right? So the average loan officer in that office, at least, really worked. They really literally worked 5 hours a day. That was it. So then my thing was, okay, cool. If I can really work double the amount of the time that they do every day, I can beat them. I don't know why that's how the math worked in my head.
Yeah.
But I was like, so I have to be here 10 hours. And I was like, and just in case, because I know there's the time that, like, I'm going to get called in so-and-so's office, I'm going to do 12. So in 12 hours of time here, I'm going to do 10 hours of work. And in that 10 hours of work, I'm going to be working twice the amount of time that they are. And then I worked to the weekend too. So then I, like, carried it through. Really stupid. I don't know why, what possessed me to do this. I didn't have an office. Like, they didn't give me an office or any of that stuff, but I was just like, I'm going to, like, in my head, this is how it worked out, right? And, but at the end of the day, what was driving me, my fuel in my tank at that point, taking that position, doing this math, working these crazy hours, grinding it out, my fuel was to tell that guy, like, F you. Like, look at what I did, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't sustainable. I made a lot of mistakes. I burned through a lot of relationships. I got a lot of volume, but it didn't last. Like, I was digging myself into a hole. So basically, like, the like, achievement story that I could tell people is, like, yeah, I went from, like, 0 in my pipeline to, like, from March of that year, I went from 0, no contacts, no business closed, right? And at the end of that year in December, I closed $5 million worth of business, right? Wow. Just in that month. Okay. Which an average loan officer is cool if they get, like, above $1 million, right? So that's, like, now we're just talking about being stupid, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a dumb thing, right? And I remember like that. It's so funny because like I always remember that December. I took half a day off, which was Christmas. Like I literally was texting everything. I remember I had family come in from out of town and I was taking a trip up to Tahoe and I'm texting on my way up to Tahoe, and which was also dumb, and you shouldn't text and drive, guys. And I don't anymore sometimes. Anyways, but so going back to it though, like it was there was just an insane amount of this, almost like an anger, but it was just this validation that I was seeking. And that was the fuel that I had in my tank. And just like a car, the hotter your fuel is, the easier your engine's going to get burned out, and it's not long term, right? And like most people, and this goes back to like what we talked about, we just keep circling that thing. But when you're building your business or you're getting ready to get into business, slower is actually better. When you slowly build brick by brick and you're retaining clients and you're building the reputation, that long-term play actually at the end of the day will outshine the rabbit that's just jamming past you like, look at me. And I cannot tell you how many times in my career I've watched the rabbit pass me and I've watched that rabbit not be in business anymore. And it happens over and over and over again.
Got to build the foundation.
And it's because they're fuel. Like that's that's the way that I look at it, but it's like whatever was in their tank that pushed them to those extraordinary lengths that they thought made sense, right? They weren't running on the right stuff, because if you really were running on the fact of like, hey, I want to build something sustainable. Here's my actual things that I feel like would make me successful. Not what people would look at me and say are successful. This is what I know would make me feel successful if I have a good work-life balance, if I'm this, if I'm that, if I have family time, like all those things. That fuel is going to cause you to outlast those people that you think are in the same lane as you, but they're really not, because they won't be there long. And it's a really difficult thing in business to understand, especially in a competitive environment, because my environment's extremely competitive, to see those things come and go. And you're just like, I want to, and as soon as I feel it, like I know now, as soon as I feel that little rev up of like, F those guys, right? Like I'm going to do, and then I have to check myself, like, why are you doing that? Are you doing that because you think that's a good idea? Are you doing that because you're trying to show off now, or you're trying to quote unquote beat them? And that's not the deal. And ironically, like in terms of like business, which is really funny, because like I've been around a lot of business people, but I feel like if you had to really look at business for what it really is, if you had to call it a sport, like business is actually more like golf than it is like any other sport, because at the end of the day, especially when you're in a leadership position, I will say actually, because at the end of the day, like it's really you versus you. And that's one of the things that sucks about being a leader, is that there isn't anyone in front of you necessarily that's showing you a path. So it really is you versus you. The dangerous thing is that the you versus you impacts a whole lot of people when you're in those positions. And that's ultimately what an entrepreneur is. Like you are leading, the way. And if you're not leading for the right reasons, or you're not checking those things, people do it all day long. It's just the sustainability is really the next question. Like how long is that going to be there, and how long is that going to last? So those are some of the things off the top of my head that I could say like are actually like things that you could look at, like what was it? Your definition of success, your reward cycle, and then also your fuel. Huge, and really impactful.
A hot topic right now is recession. People say it's coming. Some people say we're already in it. What is your take on that, and what do you think businesses should focus on going through that?
So, not to be weird, but recessions are kind of exciting a little bit. And I and this might just speak to like how quirky, my viewpoint is on it. But I will say this. Okay, so from a business perspective, I'm going to give some different answers here. If you are currently in business, the reason why recessions are devastating is because you don't change the way you do business. And that's one of the major flaws that people have in general, but recessions really highlight it, because it's just, a recession is a disruption of what we consider the norm, right? However, ironically, recessions are normal, right? It's cyclical. So they're going to come, they're going to go. right? But if we're always in a mindset of like, I don't want a recession, well, then you're just not wanting it to be normal. You just feel like you want the happy thing to be the normal, right? And it's not. So in terms of like people that are in business, you can't operate the same way. And it's probably a good thing for you to look at it, reassess, and get creative. And if you need to make shifts, pivots, obviously it's always a great time to really like tighten the reins at that point too. Those are the times to do it.
Yeah.
And it's really great. However, what I will say is from a starting business standpoint is it's going to be more difficult for sure, right? Also too, great opportunity for you to be creative, really watch your reserves. So like make sure you have enough to last. Just usually a huge issue in business anyways. People just don't last as long as they don't have built up what they need to last as long as they have, or they don't have plans to do that. But it's just about weathering the storm, so to speak. So like getting out there. But both of those places, if you're creative, if you are looking at what's going on, you're constantly assessing and you're shifting, you're going to be in a good spot. Ironically, like my business is doing better now in the slow time than it did in the super crazy time. But I'm also measuring that on like my business as a whole, not my personal production. So that's different. So, but my business as a whole is doing better, right? Because in the recession time, right now, I'm able to grow my team and bring people on that need help being more competitive in XYZ. So like I literally am in the process of shifting the business model because I know that that's the season that I'm going to be in. You know, this is not the season for me to go out and like break numbers in personal production. That would be foolish, right? Anybody that right now is planning 2023 and saying like, oh, I'm going to beat that's dumb. That's not the reality of it. That shouldn't be the reality unless you're shifting something, you're changing what you're doing. Like then that would make sense, but you can't keep doing more of the same. It's just not the right market. So those are that's what I would say, generally speaking, but I do think in every down market, there's tremendous opportunities that you wouldn't see. And most people get so caught up in the hype of it. And it's really just a mentality. Like, and it's funny how like insidious it is because I already hear people just like, oh, well, times aren't as good. You know, are they really? Are they not? Like what made it not good anymore? The fact that like there's been some job loss, like that doesn't make sense. Like most of those industries were bloated anyway. Is like that wasn't real jobs. Like if you really look at it, you know. And so I think that's probably the most dangerous thing, especially in business, is just getting into the habit of regurgitating that line instead of just saying like, no, it's like, hey, you could tell your team like, hey, times are tough. You could also look at them and say, hey, this is the time where we need to be creative. Who's got ideas? Like we're open. Let's hear them. Right. That's a great way to attack that. And so, but I know, and I have built businesses during the slow time, and it's always the best time to build. So like if you're trying to start a business or your business is just getting going or whatever, you should be super excited about all the lessons you're about to learn in a recession. And what is the neat thing about it is in a recession, what you build in a recession, with the wind in your sails, your business is going to do tremendously well. But you have to build it in the lean times to do that. And it's so funny because the reason why the recession will destroy people is because most of those people, if you probably look at it, were building businesses in the times where the sun was shining, and they didn't feel where it was at before, and they didn't think far enough ahead to say, hey, this is coming, you know? And so, but no, I tell people all the time, like, this is a great opportunity to build your business. Like if your work ethic, if all those things, like you will carry it into the good times, and you're going to be a monster when things are good, right? You're still going to do well, even though times are leaner, but all of those things are going to carry over. It's a great time, really, to like plant those seeds. But once again, I mean, I know my outlook's like a little different, but I'm not going to say like it doesn't suck. Like, yeah, people are going to lose their jobs. Like I remember it's funny, like, I've never studied like sociology, but I love the idea of like generations and seeing the trends and the cycles of them. But I think that's one of the most interesting thing about like the millennial segment, and it's self-serving because I'm in it. But millennials, when you look at the demographics and some of the statistics of like where they are as a generation, they're years behind other generations and multiple things: home ownership, car ownership. Like they have one of the highest rates of multi-generational living, which is so they like, live with parents and stuff like that, right? So they have all those things. But one of the things that is interesting about them is a generation, and I know because I was there, is like we were in adolescence going through the last downfall that we had in 2006. So like when you talk about a recession, like what we're about to hit is nothing compared to that. And I think statistically back then, like if you were in a classroom full of like kids, you could have said like, raise your hand if you know somebody that was just laid off. And that close to like a quarter of them probably would have raised their hands in like the worst of times back then. Right. So we're nowhere near that at all. But the thing is, and the thing that's interesting is like, those are the people that saw the parents lose all their houses. And like, so like now it makes sense because it's like, oh, you guys want to be more cautious because you remember shit hitting the fan before, right? Kind of. And so in the recession times, like, I think that's what's really interesting is like that impacted a whole generation, like in some way, shape or form. Like if you can remember those things, there was that traumatic or like your parents lost houses and all that other stuff, it set you up to be a lot more conservative and cautious, which I think is a really good thing. So my point is like, I feel like there's a lot more of benefits that came out of like '06 and that impacted that generation. So same thing, like whatever we're about to go through is going to be really good for like people to pick up lessons and all that other stuff. I don't think we were anywhere near where we were back then in terms of some of the financial mishaps and all that other stuff. But generally speaking, it's gonna be a good time. It'll be trying for sure. But you know, if you plant the seeds now, there's definitely going to be a harvest down the road.
Yeah. That's a really good outlook on it.
It is.
Yeah.
It's kind of similar to, I mean, not quite the same, but like when we started during COVID, and it was just everything was kind of weird, you know. But then it's like, why do things suck?
Right. Yeah.
and then it was over, and it was like we didn't change anything, but now things are good.
Right. Yeah.
So
because you guys kept up with it. You were like little by, and how much easier is business now?
So much easier.
Yeah. So if I asked you like, what was it like starting a business here? I would probably start twitching. You're like, it's like really hard because there's no one there, you know.
Yeah.
And but that's a great example of it. Like anybody that got going in COVID, like how could you not? I mean, most industries, like how could you not be doing better now? You know. And so it's really crazy. It's not funny, but it's one of the things that I think is crazy. And like sometimes I'm like, man, that, you know, I wish I would have known how to navigate that better. But ironically, like when COVID was going on, that's when people approached me and they were like, hey, I want to like be on a team with you. Kind of thing. And like, so here I am like working from my office and like everything's shut down. And I'm like, oh yeah, just come over to my house and like I'll train you and stuff. And my little COVID baby LOs, like none of them, like one of them's still kind of there, but like most of them didn't survive, you know, that time because it was hard. It was a really difficult time. And I just had to tell them like, you got to invest, like just do the things that you can do and do as much of it as you can. And it might seem dumb and like, it's not going to make sense, but at the end of the day, you're going to come out, you know, ahead. And so, watching them and the guilt of like being a leader, right? And like, oh my gosh, I wish I could have done better. What if I didn't, did I think of everything that they could have done? You know, like all those other things, but it was just a tough time, you know, but at the end of the day, like anybody that made it through that anywhere is doing, so you can go meet people. That's awesome.
This is kind of general. I know you've covered a lot of tips like this already, but if you were talking to somebody and they said they were going to start a business, what is the number one piece of advice you'd give them?
One piece of advice is why. I think that's the biggest thing is I think at the end of the day, the motivator, the fuel analogy, I think that's really pivotal. I don't inherently think like most people are not good at business. Businesses aren't as complex as people give them credit for. And it was funny because like my restaurant partner, he was telling me, we were kind of talking and I was like, it's so funny, like just now being like a restaurant owner and knowing other restaurant owners, like seeing other restaurant owners and I'm like, most of them aren't the smartest people. Like, ironically, they're just not any that I know around here. But just in general, like they, it's not like they have like college degrees in it or anything like that. Yeah. It's just like, and he was telling me, he's like, it's funny. He's like, because restaurants aren't very complicated. But a restaurant is like the one thing everybody, just like being an astronaut, like everybody's like, I would love to have this, and I would serve that. Everybody has an answer to that question. But he was saying, he was like, honestly, he's like, it's not very difficult, but it's just having the guts to like make it through the first 3 months, and and he's not wrong. And I think that going back to that what's the one piece of advice? Like, I think it is the why, because you saying I'm going to go do this is great. Like, that's when you have the most motivation. That's when you have the highest the most optimistic outlook. That's before you're learning the lessons and things are going wrong and all that other stuff, right? Yeah. But it not being fortified in like, there's a reason why I'm doing this. Having a really strong why to your endeavor, I think, is where most people do have problems. And honestly, too, I think that's also what gets people stuck. Going back to what we were just talking about, and there's tons of great examples of it in business, but a lot of successful businesses, ironically, they're in business for a reason, and it's to be in business, and that actually releases them a lot of times from even their actual business, which is where you get the pivots. Like, that's where you get the Instagram saying like, oh, well, no, it's not why I was created, but it's like, this is what's working. Let me pivot to this. Yeah. I'm actually, I'm going to say I'm reading, but it's an Audible, which I'm trying to do. But so there's this book by Ben Horowitz. That's the one I'm going through right now, but it's called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And he talks about the story about how he was in in one of the very first cloud computing concepts. Like, he was one of the first. His company, which was called Loud Cloud, coined the term cloud. So that's why we call it the cloud now, was because of Loud Cloud. Awesome. And it's just because they were one of the first companies in that space to do it. But he tells this story about how many times the business was doing great, and then it was dying, and then it's doing great, and then it was dying, right? And at that point, I don't know if he was CEO of Loud Cloud. He was CEO of his very high leadership. No, he was. He ended up, that one he was CEO. And he tells a story about essentially, like, there's this one part where the business is pretty much like, it's dead on the table, right? From their perspective. Stock is doing horrible. They don't know if they can get investors to come in. Like, he's just like, this might be it, right? Yeah. So he makes the statement where he's just like, instead of like imploding at that point, he's like, he asks himself the question, like, well, given where I'm at today, what would I do? Like, what would I do today, right? So he removed himself, and the hubris and the ego, right, it all sucked out of it. So, like, I just come to the table today, and I'm looking at this, and like, what would I do, right? Yeah. And he's like, I would take this piece and this, and I would ditch everything else, and I would just run it off of that. So he set up a team to just work on starting to dismantle, and like basically almost like Slack, where like they were creating a piece of, like, Slack was created to help a software team on a project, and now it's Slack. He basically did that. He tore the company apart, and he created a secondary one, which actually he ended up CEOing that company, and it did become its own company. That he brought it back to life. He actually sold it after that, and then he ended up I forget the project it was called, Project Rushmore or something, whatever it was, ended up becoming its own company. So he took it in the acquisition. He got part of the terms was like, give me this, because that was his escape vehicle, so to speak. Yeah. And he ended up running that company up and sold it years later too. But the point is, his why in that situation was like, hey, I'm here to accomplish X, Y, Z. As you get older and the more that you're in business and as life beats you up, it's less about what I'm doing. It's just more about why I'm doing what I'm doing. And that's where people get stuck all the time. Like, like, it's recession. Oh my gosh, like I can't do this anymore. Like, my industry is taking a hit. cool. Is that the only way to make money in your industry? Like there's nothing else that would make money in that industry right now. Right. And that's the why, right? Why would I go through all the headaches and like now I feel defeated and I feel like a failure and all that other stuff? Well, it's whatever's driving you to get there. So, a lot of people think the brave thing is like to get into business, but I really do think it's getting kicked and just saying like, okay, I'm going to take it and I'm going to keep going and I'm going to get better. And I think that's really pivotal. So that would probably be like my biggest piece of advice is like, what is the motivator here? And like to keep that in sight, because you miss so much opportunity if you get stuck onto like the idea. It's really not about that idea. Like it's not the widget. The widget is the widget, like that could actually just be what opens the door into your opportunity. Right. Yeah. Case in point. Okay. So I have a story for this. So, restaurant, thing. So, how did I get involved in like the restaurant business? Right. So, my brother, was a foodie. I bought a like full catering rig years ago. I still have it, which is funny. We'll get to that later, but I still have this thing. And so I bought this and I went to the guy and he was like, hey, like, are you in like food catering or whatever? It's just this trailer full of restaurant equipment. I was like, no, but I want to do it one day. So I ended up buying this like stupid, it was like $15,000 worth of equipment. I didn't know anything about. I know he showed me he could do this stuff and I'm going to do it. Right. So I ended up buying that equipment, whatever. It sat there. I did some cookouts, but it like pretty much sat there. Right. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to try to like, what if I do this? And then I tried to I had a meeting with somebody that had a really good concept in LA. And I was like, what if like I'm the investor and I give you the equipment and you run it? Cause like, I don't know anything about cooking or any of that. I just want to do it. Right. That didn't work out. Okay. So that trailer is still sitting there. Then my brother was going to do a concept. That trailer just sat there. Like the trailer just sat there and the trailer just sat there. And then finally I was like, I want to be in this space. it's something that I want to do. Right. So then, eventually got to the point where I had an opportunity to buy a pizza place. Right. So as we're talking about that, one of my brothers stumbles upon this pizza place. So I end up talking to the guy. I end up working on negotiating it, all of these other things. But I had no idea what I was doing because I don't run restaurants and I have no idea what a P&L for a restaurant should look like or taxes look like. It's all, Chinese at that point, right? Not to be racist or Greek. I don't know. Anyways, it's a foreign language at that point. So then I'm like, I have a client that I helped buy a house that owned a restaurant or something or a bar. Maybe they knew more than me. So I make a phone call to them and I'm like, hey, I want to buy this place. I don't know if this deal's good. I negotiated this. Like, can I pay you to look at it? Consult me, you know? And they were nice enough, like, send me the books, So I sent it all over to them. I called two clients, actually. One of my client was like, you're an idiot. Don't buy a restaurant. And then the second one was like, send it over and I'll take a look at it, right? So I sent all the stuff over to him. And he calls me back and he's like, hey, man, he's like, this isn't a good deal. He's like, I don't think this is a good deal. He's like, I don't know SoCal that well, but I don't think this is a good deal. And so I was like, kind of bummed or whatever. And so I had to, and he gave me some hard questions to ask. And I had to go back to this, it was a mom and pop. So it's like a daughter and a dad and stuff. And I'm grilling them like, what about this? It's like uncomfortable for me. And I'm like, and they didn't have good answers. He was right. Like they had some holes in their logic. And, so long story short, I walked away from that deal, and I didn't go forward with it. And it would have been cool. It would have been so cool. I bought a pizza plate or in my head, right. All the BS of what would be cool about this, but that wasn't what I was doing it for. And I had to remind myself hey, you're not doing this just to do it. You're doing it because this is this is like a long-term thing I would love to be in. Right. Yeah. But directly that trailer that led into that pizza place directly led into the restaurant because I got a phone call not that long after that. And that client was like, hey, he's like, so did you buy that pizza place? And I'm like, no, I didn't. He's like, but you're really serious about that. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to buy a place. I know I'm going to do it at this point. Right. I'm like, it just is a matter of if I'm going to get the deal that, makes the most sense. And so he's like, you're kind of crazy. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, it's just what I want to do. And so he's like, okay. He's like, I think I got an opportunity for you. And that's what led into the Twisted Pig. Yeah. Was that. And so going back to it, my why was for whatever reason that I wanted to do it. It just was something that inherently, when I thought about it, I'm like, I just would like to do it. Like, I know my grandparents had owned a restaurant for a little bit that failed and they had to close it. But like my family's, that has just always been an idea. And I'm like, I just want to be the one that does it. Like, I just feel like that would be cool. Yeah. And all those failures led to it. But going back to it, like the why didn't change. Like the why is just because this is something I feel very strongly and passionate about. And I love the creative aspect of it and all that other stuff. And I would just like to do it, you know? Yeah. So that path changed so many times. If I had stuck with the original idea of it, and I had been so mad because I spent this money on this trailer that's still sitting in my yard to this day, but ironically, that trailer is now being used for catering for my restaurant.
Yeah.
So it didn't, going back to the Goliath sword story, right? That sword never left me, right? I didn't exactly win a battle with it, but on the same token, it's like that was still there. And because I kept pushing and I pushed and I pushed, that journey of getting from there to there, we're talking about a span of like maybe like 5 years. Yeah. So for 5 years that, that was going on. And if you had talked to me, any time before in that 5-year journey, you wouldn't have seen anything happening. Yeah. Like you wouldn't have seen any waves on the water. It would have just been like, yeah, this guy's he's got a shitty old trailer sitting in his backyard and he's not in business XYZ. Yeah. And so that's a lot of that whole like, hey, it takes 20 years to be a success. What is my why? Like, am I doing this for people to be impressed with me? Because if that's the case, I would have made some really poor choices. I wouldn't have just bought the pizza place. I would have bought a lot of dumber things that I wouldn't have been equipped to handle. I wouldn't have had the right partner. I wouldn't have had the right team. I wouldn't have been honestly developed enough as a leader to be able to sit in there and make some of these calls and have some of these hard conversations. And that's really, really pivotal. And that's why most people just do not last in business, because they don't have that set up. And if the why is really like, hey, this is what I want, but I want to, my definition of success is this is what I'm aspiring to do, like that's going to carry you during those times. And so I think that would be kind of a huge thing. That's the best answer I could probably give you.
That's really good.
On that one.
Yep. Thank you guys so much for listening. We hope you learned just as much as we did on this episode of the Palikari Business Podcast.
Yeah, for more information on our guests, make sure to check out the podcast description on whatever platform you're listening on.
Yeah, and if you'd like to connect with us and continue the discussion, you can always join our Palikari community Discord and follow us on Instagram and TikTok. Just search for us under the handle @Odyssey Productions Co. for new podcast clips in your feed every week.
Until then, we'll see you next time.